Auto shutdown initiated. Auto shutdown initiated. Auto shutdown canceled. Auto shutdown initiated. Auto shutdown canceled. 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 Auto shutdown canceled.
Hey, let's go ahead and test the audio. Can you hear me? Hi, Sabrina. Welcome. Just to let you guys know, there's about a 30-second delay between the time I say something and the time you guys hear it. I just tested it and counted. Well, hopefully some more people will tune in a minute. It's not mandatory that they do so. I kind of threw this on you guys at the last minute. Um, I just wanted to be available to answer any questions you had while you were watching it. So, great. Let's go ahead and start. This is the first time I'm trying this software, so we'll see if it works. So far, so good. Let's start by going over the syllabus. I'll post this to Blackboard in just a little bit so you guys can have a copy. Um, all right, so let's start. This is Bio 139, Fall 2020, and I've put this notice here in bold at the top. It's really unfortunate. It's the reason I've been slow to get things ready. I've been trying to find someone else to take this course over because the fact of the matter is that I just don't have the time. My department just notified me that I have about 4 months to complete my dissertation, or I'm done. So then my wife is having a baby in March, and so we got that coming up. There's just going to be no time. I'm sorry. I tried to get somebody. We're still looking for somebody for now. Our classes are going to have to be held online. and I'll give you guys more notice next time so that we can get everybody on board with watching this. All right. So, as a result, the syllabus may be changed by me or by the next instructor. I don't expect I will change it, except maybe to add a paragraph about uh, online lectures. Um, Good. So I may successfully get someone to take the course over for me, and if I do, they'll need to come in. I'll try and get that to happen around the time of the first exam. So you should have me for the first unit, and then after the first unit, someone else should take over. All right, so the only prerequisite for this course is Bio 137. I assume you guys have that. Good. Let's move on. All right, and it's just some boilerplate stuff. A lot of it's the same in all of your syllabi. The textbook here is actually wrong. I just noticed that. That's okay. You've already been charged for the textbook as part of the course charge feature, and what that means is they add that onto your tuition and fees. And you get automatic access to it through Blackboard. I'll get that set up, get a video put up showing you guys how to do that right after this. Um, Good. And so you'll access the ebook through Blackboard. You'll also have assignments that are connected to the ebook, and they're actually pretty cool if you haven't used them before. Many students have. They're the Learn Smart assignments through Connect, where you answer the questions, and if you get them wrong, it can actually help you identify the passage in the textbook that would have helped you answer this question. All right, so moving down. Lecture exams make up a total of 50% of the grade. Okay. The first exam, second, and third are all worth 10%. The final exam, when I normally teach this class, is worth 20%, and it's cumulative. For me, it's twice as long as a regular exam. So you'll have 50 questions on a regular exam, and then for the final exam, you would have 100. 50 would be over the new material, 50 would be over the old material. That's if you have me until the end of the semester. Um, all right. Lab exams will be 10% each. Okay. If you had me last semester, you may remember they were 12.5% each. I decided to bring their value down a little bit and move that over to the miscellaneous category here with homework and lab work. Your homework, those are the Learn Smart Connect assignments, and then the lab work are any sheets that I hand out to you. It's often also called the lab manual grade. It's just the handouts and sheets I give to you to complete for lab. The grading scale is pretty normal. 90 to 100 is an A, 80 to 89 is a B, just like in all of your other classes. Well, most of your other classes. Sometimes nursing classes get tough, although if you're taking this, you're probably not in nursing yet. All right. So this is here. Students are expected to be present at all classes. If we successfully move this into a hybrid or online format, then we can be a little lax about attendance as long as everybody's completing the assignments and um, watching the lectures. The final exam date is May 7th at 8 a.m., and that's not likely to change. If we do get someone to take it over, that's not likely to change. Last day to withdraw with 100% refund, that's January 19th, coming up on next Sunday. And then the last day to withdraw is March 9th. After that, you have to do it through the online system and get instructor approval. Some instructors have just an absolute no policy after that date. All right, some more boilerplate stuff. All right, if you have a grievance, first try to resolve it with me, of course. That's actually part of the process. Is if you go to someone higher up, they'll tell you, look, if you didn't talk to your instructor first, you have to go back and do that. But anyway, if you do have a problem, please talk to me first. And if that doesn't work, we can elevate that to Jamie Leckie, who is my immediate supervisor. She is the biology department head. Just above her is the natural sciences division chair, Kaya Muller. And if Kaya is unable to resolve it, we can contact Randy Davis, although Randy Davis is a very, very busy guy. He covers the entire JCTC system. Moving on, more boilerplate stuff. All right. This is a very loose schedule. If I do teach it for the entire semester, this would be the order I typically take for topics. Um, we would reserve the right, of course, to if we have an exam on Tuesday, then go ahead and cover another topic. Probably move into, for instance, with exam one, if we had that on a Tuesday, we would move into cardio on Thursday. Oh, I should look up. Do we have any questions yet? No, not yet. All right. The questions appear on a separate monitor, which is over to my right. All right, so the lab final would be on April 28th, and then again, the 7th would be the lecture final. Now, these dates here in this column, this confuses people. This is the week of. So the week that contains Tuesday, January 14th, will cover the endocrine system. The week of, or that is the week that covers January 21st, next Tuesday, we would cover blood. We, of course, do have class Tuesdays and Thursdays, and so we will schedule activities for both days. All right, do we have any questions so far on the syllabus? Looks like we've got 5 people watching. I'll go ahead and wait 30 seconds. Says the course is locked. Okay, well, let me go ahead and what day was that? All right, let me go ahead and pause this stream and I will check that out right now. All right, I'm back. Yes, that was. Um, you're correct. That was not opened. I'm sorry about that. There's not a lot of content there yet, anyway, but I'll upload everything you need after this lecture. Hi, Splendy's unboxing. Well, the course, sorry, the textbook that we use, I can pull up an image over here. Let's see. I've got an image in here. whenever it wants to load. All right. So it's Anatomy and Physiology, third edition. It's got the surfer lady on the front. It's by McKinley, O'Loughlin, and Beidel. And again, you don't have to go out and buy it. You've already been charged for that as part of your course charge. All right, you'll have access to the ebook. We'll get that set up right after lecture tonight. All right, so I guess that's it for the syllabus and checking chat. Yeah, we're good. Let's go ahead and get started with the endocrine system. This is not displaying correctly. All right. All right, sorry about that technical difficulties. Oh no, it did it again. Oh, come on. Anyway, uh, all right, so you guys should be able to see it better in this view. I just can't see the chat questions. Anyway, endocrine glands versus exocrine glands, two gland types. The word endo means inside, and exo means outside. So these should be easy to keep straight. Endocrine glands secrete within the body, and then, exocrine glands will excrete outside the body. So we won't spend a whole lot of time today talking about exocrine glands, but some obvious ones include um, the skin glands. So you've got the sebaceous glands, which secrete that oily secretion sebum that coats the skin. You've got the eccrine sweat glands, and they're going to secrete that watery sweat, watery, salty sweat that we typically think of as sweat. It cools the body. And then you've got the apocrine sweat glands, which I actually study in my research, and they are found mostly in the armpit and the groin, we could say the axillary and the inguinal regions. And they secrete a watery, oily mixture. Um, yeah, anyway, they're interesting for their own reasons, but we won't spend a lot of time on it. All of that should have been covered in the skin unit. All right, so the endocrine glands, on the other hand, are secreting internally. And so you're going to have the pancreas is a major endocrine gland, internally secreting gland. Of course, everyone's familiar with the thyroid, probably the pituitary and the adrenal glands as well. Those are big ones. So what's the difference between the two? All right. Well, endocrine glands are not going to have a duct, and exocrine glands will. If you want your excretory product, if you want your substance that you're excreting to reach the outside of the body, well, then you're going to need a duct to get it there. Okay, so exocrine glands have a duct. Endocrine glands, however, when they secrete their product, they secrete it directly into the bloodstream. And so instead of a duct, what endocrine glands are going to need is a rich blood supply, lots of small blood vessels. Okay. Most of these secreting cells, too, by the way, are going to be epithelial cells. A lot of the time you'll hear the term glandular epithelium used. Good, good, good. So differences between the endocrine system and the nervous system. Both are used to communicate, both carry information throughout the body. Both are released in response to, I'm sorry, both are activated in response to a stimulus, and then they will um, send a signal to a different part of the body where they get a response or an effect. The difference is one, time, and two, method of travel for their message. You're very familiar with the nervous system now, so you know the axons in the peripheral nervous system can be incredibly long. For instance, the muscles that control my index finger are innervated by um, neurons that have cell bodies all the way back in the spinal cord. All right. So if you follow that back along the length of the arm, you're looking at easily over 2 feet. Good. So the distance traveled there. But we're able to get this message across that vast distance, and for a cell, that is a vast distance, 2 feet, um, quickly with an action potential. If we were to send the same signal with hormones secreted by glands, that would have to travel through the bloodstream, which could take seconds to minutes, depending on which part of the body you're talking about. Um, yeah. All right. So the endocrine system, instead of carrying out action potentials and all that, when they're stimulated to secrete, they just release their product, and they do it through exocytosis or some similar mechanisms, and they will dump their product out of the cell into the interstitial fluid where it then diffuses into the bloodstream. That was a lot of talking. The short of that is that the endocrine system is much slower. On the other hand, the endocrine system will have a much longer lasting effect, typically. Um, Whenever a neuron is done stimulating its target, the stimulus to the target ends almost immediately. The synaptic knobs or terminal boutons, whichever term you prefer down here, will begin sucking up the neurotransmitter immediately. You have enzymes like acetylcholinesterase that will come through and start breaking up the neurotransmitter, and no more will be released. So this signal ends almost immediately. On the other hand, okay, over here we have some glandular cells secreting their product out into the interstitial fluid, where it then diffuses into the bloodstream, travels through the bloodstream. Bloodstream goes pretty much everywhere. The vasculature goes pretty much everywhere. Carries this hormone all throughout the body, and then eventually dumps it off at the target cells. Okay. Now, what is the target cell for a gland? It's the same kind of concept as what is the target cell for a neuron. And that's let me back up there. That's not the best way to put it. That's not. What is the target cell for a glandular cell? We'll say it that way. Let's forget about neurons for a second. And that's any cell with a receptor for the hormone. Okay, that's being secreted. So if this is the adrenal gland, it's going to secrete norepinephrine or epinephrine, also known as adrenaline or noradrenaline. And the target cell is going to be any cell in the body that has a receptor for adrenaline or noradrenaline or epinephrine or norepinephrine. All right, so the target cells, good. They have the receptors for the hormone. That's the takeaway there. So here's some of the major endocrine glands. We've got the pituitary. Now you probably remember the pituitary is attached to the hypothalamus. All right, it's attached by a thin stalk called the infundibulum. All right, over here it's listing the pineal gland. The pineal gland, you may remember, converts the neurotransmitter serotonin into melatonin. A lot of people take melatonin to help them sleep. Melatonin, the hormone, helps prepare the brain for sleep. It doesn't knock you out, but it helps get you ready for sleep. All right, then down here, the thyroid gland. Thyroid gland secretes thyroid hormone, which has effects throughout the body, especially in young people. Over here we got the thymus. Now the thymus starts out quite large in children and shrinks over time to the point where it may be non-existent in people who are very old. It shrinks to be very small and then is replaced with fibrous tissue. All right. Here we have the adrenal glands sitting on top of the kidneys. So the term renal, you may know, refers to kidneys, and adrenal means on top of the kidneys, and that's where you'll find them, these little pyramid-shaped cones on top of the kidneys. So this is where we get the name adrenaline from the adrenal glands. Um, you've also got noradrenaline. Epinephrine, you may also know nephro also refers to the kidneys, and so epi also means above. Epinephrine means above the kidneys as well. Although this is not the epinephris gland, no one uses that term. Here we have the pancreas, found more or less posterior to the stomach, and it's a major gland. 15% of the cells in the pancreas are endocrine glands, and actually about 85% of the cells in the pancreas are exocrine glands. Now, that's one class of exocrine gland we didn't mention earlier, and that's the exocrine glands in the digestive system. There are three major locations for them. I'll say three major locations for exocrine glands in the digestive system. You have the salivary glands, which are going to secrete saliva. You have gastric glands in the stomach, and then the pancreas is going to secrete its contents into the intestines. Now, if exocrine glands secrete outside the body, and these digestive glands are secreting into the digestive tract, why do we call them exocrine glands? And the reason for it may shock you, and that's that the lumen of the digestive tract, the space inside the digestive tract, is technically outside your body. And you'll hear more about that in the digestive unit. All right, so here is a long list of hormones and which glands produce them. The hypothalamus, I never spend a whole lot of time asking people to remember the names of the hormones here. Um, just because we spend a lot of time talking about the anterior pituitary hormones, and the hypothalamic hormones are going to stimulate the anterior pituitary gland to release these hormones. The names are connected, though, easy to figure out. In the hypothalamus will release corticotropin releasing hormone. Tropin means it's a hormone that's going to have an effect somewhere else in the body. Cortico refers to the cortex. And so corticotropin releasing hormone is going to cause the release of adrenocorticotropic hormone. All right. And adrenocorticotropic, the name here, tropic again, means it'll have an effect somewhere else in the body. The cortico refers to the cortex of the adrenal glands. All right, the cortex of the adrenal glands, adrenocortico. That may seem like a lot. I know. And that's why I ask people typically to remember the anterior pituitary hormones, get them memorized. The hypothalamic hormones, most of them will just simply have an effect on the release of the anterior pituitary hormones. The posterior pituitary gland is easy. Only two hormones: antidiuretic hormone, also known as vasopressin or vasopressin, and oxytocin. Okay, we'll talk about that more later. The thyroid gland releases calcitonin, thyroxine, and triiodothyronine. Okay. Why the names here? Calcitonin is going to stimulate the storage of calcium. It's going to stimulate the storage of calcium. It's released when blood calcium levels are too high, and we need to store that excess calcium. Triiodothyronine, T3. The name comes from tri, 3, iodo, iodine, and then thyrine. It is a hormone with 3 iodine atoms attached to it. T4 is actually also, it's the exact same hormone, but with a 4th iodine attached to it. And so its full name is tetraiodothyronine, but people decided that was too long and they just call it thyroxine. Okay. All right, moving on. The parathyroid gland only releases one hormone, and that's parathyroid hormone. You guys probably should have talked about that during the skeletal unit, I imagine. It's released when blood calcium levels are too low, and it's going to stimulate osteoclasts in the bone to dissolve the bone and release calcium into the bloodstream through a process called resorption. All right, then the adrenal medulla is going to release, did I say medulla? Yeah, adrenal medulla is going to release epinephrine and norepinephrine. And if you were in my class before, you probably got the speech about how that line in The Water Boy changed how everyone says this word. There is something wrong with your medulla oblongata. That line is so prevalent that many scientists actually say medulla oblongata now. The correct pronunciation is medulla, and even among scientists everywhere else in the body, outside of the medulla oblongata, we pronounce it medulla. All right. Now these are also epinephrine, norepinephrine, as we said, also known as adrenaline and noradrenaline. All right. It's another one of those east-west divides. I think the American names are epinephrine and norepinephrine, and I know those are the names preferred worldwide. I believe adrenaline and noradrenaline are actually preferred in Britain. Now, of course, in common English, you hear people talk about adrenaline all the time. Common American English, you hear people talk about adrenaline. All right, down here, adrenal cortex releases aldosterone and cortisol. It actually also releases a small amount of testosterone in both men and women. It is the main source of testosterone for women, the adrenal cortex. The pancreas releases actually a number of hormones, but the 3 most important are glucagon, insulin, and somatostatin. Good, good, good. There is one hypothalamic hormone that would be good to know, and that's prolactin release inhibiting hormone. Because these other hormones, other than somatostatin, are going to stimulate the release of anterior pituitary hormones. Prolactin release inhibiting hormone is going to actually inhibit the release of prolactin down here. Another interesting thing about prolactin release inhibiting hormone is that its other name is dopamine. So excess dopamine can actually inhibit the release of prolactin. All right, I'm going to switch out of this view, check the chat, see what we got. Hey Sabrina, thank you for your question. Yeah, I believe they will be taken online until another professor can pick up the class. All right, so All right, back to the presentation. This is reversed again. All right. So hormones are going to be organic compounds, and there are two main classes of hormones. You have the steroid or steroid-like hormones. And these are going to be made from lipids. In fact, they're actually all going to be made from cholesterol, which is a lipid, by the way. The non-steroidal hormones are going to have four subgroups. You got the amines, the proteins, the peptides, and the glycoproteins. And they're all related to proteins and amino acids in some way or another. We'll talk about them. Do we have more on this? Yeah, so let's go back. Sorry to get all spastic on the mouse there. All right, so the steroid hormones, yeah, these are, again, they're derived from cholesterol. We will chemically convert or enzymatically convert cholesterol to make these hormones. And so the sex hormones are steroids. Testosterone is the main male hormone. The male hormones as a group are called androgens, but testosterone's the main one. It's the only one we ever talk about. Uh, estrogens. Now, estrogens, this is actually a group of female hormones, female sex hormones. The main one is estradiol. For some reason, we never talk about estradiol. All right. Moving on, the adrenal cortex hormones, including cortisol and aldosterone. Those are also steroid hormones. And then, of course, it's important to remember that the adrenal cortex also secretes a little bit of testosterone. For men, it's a very small percentage of the total, but for women, it's 100% of their natural testosterone. All right, so the non-steroid hormones, you've got the amines, and these are going to be derived from the amino acid tyrosine. All right, and these include epinephrine and norepinephrine. So if it's derived from an amino acid, it's going to be small because an amino acid is just one building block in an otherwise large structure like a protein, right? All right, so proteins are, of course, long chains of amino acids, and the example here is growth hormone. And then peptides include short chains of amino acids, typically pretty short chains of amino acids. Oxytocin's the example, and then glycoproteins here you're going to have a sugar or a carbohydrate joined to a protein. The example there is TSH. All right, so here we have some images. You can see here cortisol and no, not norepinephrine. Cortisol is derived from cholesterol. Actually, I'm going to exit the view and pull up an image of new window cholesterol so that you can see its chemical formula. All right, this is cholesterol. You guys get a good look at that. All right, and back over here. Very similar with the ring structures. Not a lot of modification necessary to make cortisol. Over here on the right, we have norepinephrine. It is a single, well, it is derived from the single amino acid tyrosine. It's roughly the size of a single amino acid. And looking at it, it doesn't look like it would even be a very big amino acid. It would be among the smaller ones. All right, now moving on here, we have parathyroid hormone, which is a long chain of amino acids. So it's a protein, long chain here. Each of these subunits, by the way, is the name of an amino acid. So you've got alanine, valine, serine, and glutamine. You don't have to memorize all these, just Just know that each one of these is an amino acid in a long chain. Down here we have a short chain of amino acids. You can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 amino acids. It's a peptide. This is oxytocin. And then prostaglandin over here. We didn't mention prostaglandin over here. It is one of the lipid hormones. And you can see the fatty acid chains here. It's actually a signaling lipid. Yeah, I, I'm not going to split hairs on it. All right. All right. So hormones can exert effects by altering enzymatic activity in their target cell. They can also affect the rate of transport of a substance. Easy example there is insulin. Everybody's heard of insulin. It's released by the pancreas in response to high blood sugar. All right. And so if your blood sugar is high, you're going to release insulin. If you release insulin, that stimulates cells to start inserting glucose transporters in the cell membrane. Okay. Then you can bring glucose into the cells, which lowers your uh, blood glucose levels back to normal, ideally, and then over time, uh, below normal. It drops, and that's when you start releasing glucagon. Anyway, hormones deliver their message by binding to receptors that are on or in their target cell. And the number of receptors, excuse me, determines the strength of the response, and it can be changed and alter the response. So you can upregulate the response by increasing the number of receptors on the cell, making it easier to stimulate the cell, or you can downregulate the response by decreasing the number of receptors, meaning that you'll need a larger amount of hormone to stimulate a downregulated cell because it has fewer receptors. All right, so steroid hormones and also the thyroid hormones, they have poor water solubility, which means they're not water soluble. Um, all right, but they are lipid soluble, and that's kind of key here. Steroid and the thyroid hormones are lipid soluble, so they can get through the plasma membrane. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means that their receptor is probably going to be inside the cell somewhere, probably outside the nucleus, and in fact, the steroid hormones do bind to a receptor outside the nucleus and then travel into the nucleus to affect their changes. All right, down here we have the nucleus, we have the hormone entering the cell, binding to, in this case, a receptor inside the nucleus, um, and then binding to DNA to promote transcription of certain genes. All right, so non-steroidal hormones, the ones that are derived from amino acids or proteins, those are not going to be able to enter cells. They're either too large or they're too charged to enter a cell. So their receptors are actually going to be on the plasma membrane. Okay? If you can't enter the cell, if you're going to have any effect, the receptor's got to be on the membrane. All right. And so the hormone in this case is a first messenger. The first messenger binds to the receptor on the cell surface. All right. And then it doesn't enter the cell from there. It triggers the release of a second messenger inside the cell. And so this is kind of similar to how GCPRs, sorry, I was right the first time, G protein coupled receptors, GPCRs. If you studied those, maybe in another class or even this class might have covered it if you took uh, the right professor. It's similar to how they work. And so basically here, the hormone binds to, all right, the receptor The receptor is attached to a G protein complex, and a little piece of this complex is going to be released, and it goes out and it stimulates another protein to start working. Okay? In this exact example, we're going to be converting ATP to cyclic AMP, okay? And then increasing levels of cyclic AMP are going to have effects on protein kinases, and then there's going to be a whole lot of downstream effects. Everything from this point on is very complicated. So just to keep it simple, non-steroidal hormone can't enter the cell, has to bind a receptor here. It binds to the receptor but still can't enter the cell. So on the other side, all right, a second messenger is going to be created. All right, a little piece of the G protein complex stimulates adenylate cyclase, which in turn converts ATP to cyclic AMP, and cyclic AMP is the second messenger. It goes on and stimulates the protein kinases. All right, so abusing hormones to improve athletic performance. Of course, we all know steroids can be used to increase muscular strength. Anabolic steroids, they can have harmful effects. They can decrease your natural testosterone production. We'll see why in a little bit, but basically, your body says, hey, my testosterone levels are already high because you're injecting excess testosterone essentially. And so it's going to stop producing its own. It can stunt your growth if you take these steroids early, prematurely. You may see the development of breasts in males after you quit taking steroids. And of course, you can't take steroids all the time, you have to cycle on and off. All right, so male sexual characteristics will show up in females. Hirsutism, that's extra hairiness. You'll also see damage to the kidneys. All this protein is going to clog up the kidneys, and the kidneys are basically a blood filter. All right, you'll clog up that filter. And then liver or heart will also, the liver's also got some filter-like features. And then the heart has a small blood supply that is sensitive to these things. You'll see an increase in low-density lipoprotein, LDL, cholesterol, as well as certain psychiatric problems commonly referred to as roid rage. Growth hormone. If you abuse growth hormone, it can be used to enlarge muscles, and it's sometimes used instead of or along with steroids. Erythropoietin. This was abused by Lance Armstrong. I think it's the thing that got him in trouble. He was blood doping for a while. That's something people used to do where they would remove blood during training, store it in a cold freezer, and then before a big race or athletic event, they'd have a doctor basically pump all that blood back into their bloodstream. And what that does is, one, increases your blood pressure, which is going to move oxygen more rapidly through the system. It also increases the amount of hemoglobin in the blood, which is going to increase the oxygen carrying capacity of the blood. Okay. Erythropoietin is easier than blood doping, though, and has, well, I was going to say fewer risks, but still pretty serious risks. Basically, erythropoietin is a hormone produced within the body which stimulates the red bone marrow to produce red blood cells. Okay, and so athletes like Lance Armstrong, they use it to increase the red blood cell count, which again increases their oxygen carrying capacity. It can lead to heart attack and death, as it's going to increase your risk for blood clots. Prostaglandins, we saw in that picture earlier, they're a paracrine substance, so what that means is that they stimulate nearby cells. They won't have an effect far out in the body. They may not even enter the bloodstream. They'll spread through the interstitial fluid and just affect the nearby cells. They're not stored. They're going to be synthesized just before release, and they're rapidly inactivated after. All right. All right, so hormone secretion is mostly controlled by negative feedback mechanisms. Okay, what does that mean? And that's when we get back to our homeostatic set point, the stimulus disappears, and so we're going to stop producing our product. And our product in this case, in this chapter, is going to be a hormone. All right. So the hormone effects, they can be short-lived, that is for a few minutes, or they may last for a few days. Now, when we say short-lived, that's short-lived for the endocrine system. A few minutes is short for the endocrine system. For the nervous system, it's over in milliseconds. When the stimulus stops, the signal will stop within milliseconds. All right, so hormone secretions are precisely regulated, and then they're excreted in the urine after we've seen their effects. All right, and then they can be broken down by the liver to stop their effects. All right. In a small number of cases, you may see positive feedback, and positive feedback is where the response is actually going to feed into the stimulus, all right, and increase it so that we get more response. As you can imagine, this is not homeostasis. This is kind of spiraling out of control, positive feedback. And so most of the body's mechanisms are going to be controlled through negative feedback, trying to bring us back to our homeostatic set point. But there are a couple cases where you would want to use positive feedback, and one is childbirth. Okay, and so in childbirth, when you're ready to give birth, the child's head pushes against the cervix. Okay, and this cervix stimulates the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary to release. No, I'm sorry. The hypothalamus and the posterior pituitary to release oxytocin. Oxytocin travels through the bloodstream, reaches the smooth muscle in the wall of the uterus, causes contractions. Well, guess what? Those contractions cause the baby's head to push even harder against the cervix, which causes the cervix to stimulate the hypothalamus to release more oxytocin. More oxytocin, more contractions, more pushing on the cervix, more oxytocin, more contractions, more pushing on the cervix, more oxytocin, more contractions, more pushing on the cervix, until eventually we get parturition, or in other words, the baby is born. All right. And so as you can see there, in a positive feedback loop, if the response is going to increase the stimulus, if the response is going to increase the original stimulus, we're going to need something to break us out of this loop. And that's, in this case, parturition. That's childbirth. Once the child's born, then we stop stimulating. We stop pressing on the cervix. We stop stimulating the release of oxytocin. Now, oxytocin, just to be clear, for those of you interested, will continue to be released at some level for a while after childbirth. It actually helps the uterus get back down to size, its normal resting size. All right, so good. Negative feedback. Most of the body's controlled by negative feedback. We discussed an example already, insulin. My blood sugar is high. I just ate. I just drank 2 monsters. Right. My blood sugar is spiking. My pancreas is going to release insulin. Insulin binds the receptors that increase the transport of glucose from the bloodstream into the cells. All right. So if we do that, we suck up all the sugar in our bloodstream and we pull it into the cells. We get it out of the bloodstream. That's going to bring my blood sugar levels back to normal. Now, once my blood sugar levels are back to normal, I'm going to stop releasing insulin. Right. So the response lowered my blood sugar levels and ended the stimulus. That's negative feedback. right, so good. So three methods here in which negative feedback control hormone secretion. We've got tropic hormones. These are hormones that act on other glands, or in other words, yeah, that's good, to regulate their hormone secretion. Um, and so when we talk about tropic hormones, we talk about a lot of them in the anterior pituitary. A lot of those are tropic hormones. Um, all right, so nervous system control also controls the release of certain hormones. For instance, the two released by the posterior pituitary, oxytocin and vasopressin, or ADH, antidiuretic hormone, those are both going to be controlled by the hypothalamus through nervous stimulation. And then, of course, changes in the composition of the internal environment. Yeah, I believe the beta cells of the pancreas are directly stimulated by elevated blood sugar levels, and so in that case, they are being stimulated directly by changes in the internal environment. All right, so here you can see an example with the tropic hormones. You've got the hypothalamus stimulating the anterior pituitary to stimulate a third gland to release the hormone, finally, the one of interest, that travels to target cells and we get our action or our response. Now, in this case, in many cases, the release of the peripheral hormone, whatever that might be, we could say adrenaline or noradrenaline, epinephrine or norepinephrine, um, that will in turn shut off the release of the hormones that were being released by the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary that led to the release of noradrenaline and adrenaline. Or that's actually a bad example. Let's say cortisol. Cortisol is a good one. So, all right. So you've got the corticotropin releasing hormone in the hypothalamus, which stimulates adrenocorticotropic hormone release in the anterior pituitary, and that in turn acts on the adrenal cortex to release cortisol. Cortisol is going to travel through the body to, say, fat and muscle cells, stimulate them. We get our action. Um, we're going to alter our metabolism, and then the release of cortisol is also going to block the release of corticotropin releasing hormone in the hypothalamus, and it'll block the release of adrenocorticotropic hormone in the anterior pituitary. Over here under nervous system control, the nervous system controls an endocrine gland which releases its hormone directly to targeted cells, and then we get our response. The response in turn comes up and turns off the nervous system. And over here we have the changes in the level of a substance in plasma. For instance, we discussed glucose. That stimulates an endocrine gland, for instance, the beta cells of the pancreas, to in turn release their hormone, let's say insulin, which acts on target cells, in this example, almost every cell of the body, to start bringing in glucose. All right. And then we bring in that glucose, we take it out of the bloodstream, that ends the stimulus. Okay. All right, and so negative feedback, here's a visual example of it. I'm sorry, I was just looking over for questions. No new ones. Okay. You're welcome, Sabrina. All right. Good. Here we have negative feedback. All right. We could say it again just to run through real quick. We got too high, blood sugar's too high. Okay, that's going to stimulate the release of insulin. That's going to bring down the blood sugar, which ends the stimulus, and then in turn, the insulin will stop being released. Now our blood sugar levels fall too low, and we're going to release glucagon. Glucagon, in turn, stimulates the release of sugars into the bloodstream, basically stimulates the liver to break down its stored up glycogen and then release that sugar into the bloodstream. And that's going to bring our blood sugar levels back up to normal. All right, and then maybe we overshoot it a little bit, and we go through the loop again. We overshoot it a little bit, we go through the loop again, and you'll actually see your blood sugar levels are not constant throughout the day, but they actually kind of move up and down and up and down. And actually, almost all of our hormone levels are going to move up and down throughout the day as we stimulate the release of the hormone, and then negative feedback shuts it off. Hormone levels drop when hormone levels are too low. Stimulation will begin again, and then we end the stimulus, and our hormone levels drop again. Almost every hormone is going to look something like that. Insulin and glucagon are a little bit different. You'll see spikes and drops because we eat and that's going to cause our blood sugar to spike. Most of us eat way too much, way too sugary, way too fatty foods, although fat does not directly here have an effect on insulin. Let's say in general, fat doesn't affect insulin. Uh, that is 99% true. I'm sorry, it's hard to ever say anything's 100% true in science. There's always some exception. It's 99% true. Fat does not affect insulin. Uh, but we eat a lot of crap. I might, and this happens a couple times a year. I will drink 2 monsters in a day, and then my blood sugar will spike. That's not good, especially for diabetics who have trouble controlling that. We'll talk about diabetes later. All right, moving on. We've got the pituitary gland, and the pituitary gland sits in a U-shaped depression on the anterior cranial floor called the sella turcica. And it's one of my favorite words in anatomy and physiology. It's just fun to say. Sella turcica. Anyway, uh, it's connected to the hypothalamus by a thin stalk called the infundibulum. All right, and then it's got two lobes. Technically three. All right, it's got two lobes called the anterior lobe or adenohypophysis, and it's got a posterior lobe called the neurohypophysis. Now, I just whispered there technically three to be funny. There are technically three lobes in the fetus. In the fetus, there are three lobes: an anterior, a middle, and a posterior. I think around the time of birth, the middle lobe actually gets absorbed by the anterior lobe. So in the child and adult, you will see that there are two lobes. All right, so in childhood and adulthood, there are two lobes, the anterior and the posterior. The anterior is bigger because it absorbed the middle lobe. Um, Good. Adeno means it refers to glands. So adenohypophysis is the glandular lobe, and neuro, of course, refers to the nervous system. So the posterior lobe is the nervous system's hypophysis. All right, so you can see here we have the pituitary gland, and the anterior lobe is larger than the posterior. Okay, posterior is the small one in back here. Connected by this thin stalk. Both lobes are. All right, this thin stalk is called the infundibulum, connected to the hypothalamus in here. Okay. Of course, you recognize the thalamus. That's easy to spot. Hypo means below or less than. So the hypothalamus is this region below the thalamus. Now, you remember from the nervous system unit that the hypothalamus is the uh, control center for just about all of homeostasis. Not all, but the vast majority of it. There are respiratory and heart rate centers that are located in the brainstem. The brainstem's very important for certain things. But just about everything else will be controlled in some way by the hypothalamus. So it does control the body through, it does control homeostasis through the nervous system, but also by exerting its effects on the pituitary gland. And the hypothalamus actually can produce hormones. And so it can stimulate the anterior pituitary with hormones, or it can stimulate the posterior pituitary through nervous stimulation. All right. Here is a fun word. The blood system that connects the network of blood vessels that connects the hypothalamus to the anterior pituitary is called the hypothalamic hypophyseal portal system. All of those words are right here. The hypothalamic hypophyseal portal system. It's a tough one. All right, so that's the name for the system of blood vessels that connect the two. And of course, this system of blood vessels will carry hormones produced in the hypothalamus to the anterior pituitary, where they will have their effect. And most of them will stimulate the anterior pituitary to release some hormone or another. Of course, we mentioned already how prolactin inhibiting hormone produced in the hypothalamus will travel through the bloodstream and inhibit the release of uh, prolactin. So one notable exception right there. Over here in this image, we have nerve fibers, little axons here traveling down into the posterior pituitary. And it's going to stimulate the hypothalamus is through these axons, through these nerve fibers, going to stimulate the posterior pituitary to release oxytocin and ADH or vasopressin. All right, same thing, ADH and vasopressin, same thing, different names. All right. Now, those two hormones, interestingly enough, are actually not made in the posterior pituitary. They're made in the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus makes it, packages it up, sends it on down to the posterior pituitary. And the posterior pituitary stores it, just stores these hormones until they're ready for release. All right. So you've got the hypothalamic anterior pituitary axis, and that's going to involve the hypothalamus releasing a releasing hormone. This stimulates the anterior pituitary to release an anterior pituitary hormone. This anterior pituitary hormone stimulates a third or peripheral gland to stimulate its hormone, which then travels to target cells. All right. All right. And so let's see. Sorry for getting spastic with the mouse here. I'm trying to think which image would be best to explain this. Uh, we've mentioned this one a couple times. Okay, corticotropin releasing hormone is made and released from the hypothalamus, travels through the hypophyseal portal system down here to the anterior pituitary. It binds to receptors here, and that stimulates the release of adrenocorticotropic hormone. Adrenocorticotropic hormone is then going to enter the bloodstream and travel out to the adrenal cortex. In this example, the adrenal cortex is the peripheral gland. That's the third gland, and it's going to release cortisol. Cortisol then travels again, throughout the body to a couple target tissues, muscle, liver, adipose. All right, anterior pituitary hormones. Let's talk about them. We got the growth hormone, prolactin, thyroid stimulating hormone, adrenocorticotropic hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, and luteinizing hormone. So, growth hormone's name is pretty straightforward. It's the hormone responsible for growth. It's also responsible for uh, a number of other things. It has major metabolic effects, we'll say. It has major metabolic effects. Prolactin promotes the production of milk. Now, why would we want to inhibit prolactin's release? Because we don't need to produce milk all the time. And that may not seem like that big of a deal now. So, what if we did produce milk all the time? It would be inconvenient. Like, I guess natural selection doesn't care about convenience. We would be wasting nutrients, vital nutrients, if we were constantly producing milk. Uh, our ancestors did not have much to eat, and so they needed to preserve all the resources for themselves. All right, so we inhibit the release of prolactin until parturition, until childbirth. Once the child's born, then we release prolactin, we produce milk, and interestingly enough, prolactin is actually not responsible for the release of milk, only its production. A separate hormone, actually oxytocin, which we mentioned before, oxytocin is responsible for milk ejection, or in other words, release from the nipple. All right, thyroid stimulating hormone. Name is straightforward. This hormone stimulates the thyroid. Adrenocorticotropic hormone. We have talked about to death already. Tropic, all right, means it's going to act on another gland. This hormone is going to act on another gland. What gland? The adrenal cortex. All right, so this hormone will act on another gland. That gland is the adrenal cortex. Down here, we haven't mentioned yet FSH or LH, follicle stimulating hormone or luteinizing hormone. Follicle stimulating hormone is going to, let me do the example backwards. Luteinizing hormone is going to stimulate the interstitial cells, also known as cells of Leydig, in the in the testicles to produce testosterone. Okay, so LH stimulates those cells to produce testosterone. FSH, on the other hand, is going to stimulate Sertoli cells in the testicles, which promote the production of sperm. Now, these two hormones together are known as the gonadotropins, and they have similar effects in women, where luteinizing hormone stimulates the release of estradiol, the main estrogen, and then FSH stimulates actually the growth and development of the follicle that will release an egg or ovum. All right, and so here's a mnemonic I saw in a book a long time ago. If you want to remember the 6 main anterior pituitary hormones, you've got pro athletes got to grow. Prolactin, athletes, ACTH, that's adrenocorticotropic hormone. Got, that's the gonadotropins, FSH and LH. 2, thyroid stimulating hormone. And then growth hormone. If you can think of a better one, you are welcome to use it. But if you want to use that one, it's all yours. All right, and so this slide's kind of similar to the last one where we're basically looking at the hormone that is released. It enters the bloodstream and seeing its target tissue. Growth hormone is going to, well, all right. From the hypothalamus, growth hormone releasing hormone, GHRH, is going to stimulate the release of growth hormone. Somatostatin from the hypothalamus is actually going to inhibit growth hormone release. The targets of growth hormone are going to be the bone, the muscles, and the adipose tissue. It'll stimulate the burning of fat, the building of muscle, the building of bone. Now, why would we want to turn off something that burns fat? Well, for one, you need a certain amount to live. Um, I mean, it's not much, but you need a certain amount to live. And then, as far as building muscle and building bone, muscle's a very expensive tissue. We don't want to waste resources we don't have to on building it. Same with, well, bone's not expensive, but again, we don't want to overbuild it or we will inhibit its function. Over here, we have prolactin releasing factor and prolactin inhibiting hormone. Prolactin inhibiting hormone is released constitutively, which means just all the time. And that's going to inhibit the release of prolactin until around the time of childbirth. TRH is thyrotropin releasing hormone. This hormone is going to release another hormone that acts on another gland, in this case, the thyroid. Okay, so we just break that name down. This hormone releases another hormone that acts on a gland. Which gland? The thyroid. All right, so thyrotropin releasing hormone is going to stimulate in the anterior pituitary the release of TSH, or thyroid stimulating hormone. Thyroid stimulating hormone, name is straightforward. It's going to go down and stimulate the thyroid. And it's going to stimulate the thyroid to release T3 and T4. It actually does not stimulate the release of the other thyroid hormone. Do you guys remember what it was? It was, take a breath, calcitonin. All right, and so calcitonin is actually released in response to high blood calcium levels. And if blood calcium levels are high, what's calcitonin going to do? It's going to lower them by causing us to store calcium in our bones. All right, over here we got CRH, corticotropin releasing hormone. Name again, this is a hormone that causes the release of another hormone. The hormone that gets released, excuse me, will act on the cortex, and we know that's the adrenal cortex. We move down here. Corticotropin releasing hormone causes the release of ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone, which is going to act on the adrenal cortex. And the adrenal cortex, in turn, then releases cortisol. Sorry. GnRH, that's gonadotropin releasing hormone. This one releasing hormone stimulates the release of both LH and FSH. And so we'll often treat them together as the gonadotropins when we're casually talking about these things. They exert their effects in the ovary and the testis, or testes, plural. Okay, I'm running out of breath. We've talked about this to death. We're about halfway through the slides. I tell you what, I think I'm going to pause here. I'm going to ask you guys if you have any questions, and then I will save the rest of the lecture for Thursday. I will also get up some activities to complete as a sort of online lab um, activity, and that'll go into the lab manual grade we discussed in the syllabus. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to turn off my mic for a second, and I'll let you guys come up with questions. All right, I guess that's enough time. We'll go ahead and end it. If you guys do have any questions, remember you can email me anytime at what's my email? Let me type it on the screen so you can see it. Oh, all right, and there we go. jmolnar0001 at kctcs.edu. I will be happy to answer any questions. I am making a concerted effort to get back to people as quickly as possible. Within 48 hours is the maximum I want to do, but ideally within a day or less. So I see some questions now. What time will the next live lecture be? I tell you what I can do is put out one of those "what time works for you guys" things, and I'll put that out uh, later tonight. It'll be open till Wednesday night, and then people can let me know what time works best for them, and we'll go from there. We'll do it Tuesday, Thursday. Will the labs also be online? Um, yes, yes. So the labs will be online. We'll have mainly uh, images to go through and lab packets to complete. For the endocrine system, that's really all you can do anyway. There are no experiments we can do with the endocrine system. All you can do is draw and label and answer questions about it. Um, Only a couple major structures to identify. Of course, we saw the pancreas. That should be an easy one to spot. Thyroid. Um, Thymus is on some of the models. It would be small in the adult, large in the child. Pituitary we've seen before. Hypothalamus we've seen before. We all know that from the nervous system unit. Yeah, adrenal glands easy to spot, sitting right on top of the kidney. So for the endocrine unit specifically, there's not a whole lot you can do except maybe label some things and answer some questions. Next up, we got blood. There is an experiment I normally like to do in lab with blood. I may just do it on video and share it with you guys. But there would still be packets and whatnot to complete. Maybe some with simulated data. That would be good. All right, great. Thank you, Zach Wells and Sabrina. Is it Lorit or Yorit? Do you guys have any more questions? Okay. Thank you for clarifying. Um, all right. So if you guys don't have any more questions, would you do me a favor and go ahead and say good night or something in the text box and just let me know you're done and I'll end it. Otherwise, I'm happy to stay here and answer any questions you got. Sorry about the long pauses. Again, there's about a 30-second delay between I say something um, and you hear it. All right, good. Well, I'm glad to talk to you guys at least tonight. Thanks for hanging it out, sticking it out, hanging out. It's late. I know this is just too late for most people. Um, all right, so we'll hopefully have this a little bit earlier. We'll see what people say and what time's good for you. And you guys have a good night.